Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Digital Supply Chain Podcast. My name is Tom Raftery, and with me on the show today, I have my special guest, Kevin. Kevin, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, Tom. It's Kevin Bailey. I'm the CEO of Design1st, a product development company. We're located in Canada, just north of the border, and we've got a team of 30, and we do product development for hire. Companies find us when they're looking to innovate and create on physical products, not the digital world.
Okay, and give us a bit of context and a bit of background to this, Kevin. What was the genesis story for the founding of your company?
Sure. I started in the late 70s, early 80s, many, many years ago in engineering. Came out to a very busy migration to digital as the communication industry was moving to a full digital platforms in the telecommunications space. I started with Nortel Networks in the early 80s. We did some very interesting designs that was user focused and device focused, product, not the network. And through the 80s and 90s, I developed a product with a global team of 100 people, cognitive psychologists, behavioral researchers, engineers, user interface people, industrial designers. And as a group of people, we work for the corporate group, working with all the divisions globally, helping develop new telephones, new devices. Through the 90s, it was putting displays on refrigerators, doing the early smartphone development. Some of the team went on to work with Apple, and Apple released the first smartphones, mid 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
So really energetic, interesting place to learn about how you take user value, how you look backwards into technology, pull that technology into something useful, and get it through a supply network so that it becomes a device that's actual, reliable in the market and provides a use to some task that users are doing.
Okay, superb. For regular listeners to this podcast, we often, Kevin, talk about other aspects of supply chain, warehousing, logistics, manufacturing, these kind of things. I think this is only the second episode where we've talked about design. So people listening might not be familiar with where, I know it might sound intuitive, where design fits into supply chain, but just talk me through the process of where design fits into supply chain so that people can get an idea of what it is we're talking about.
Sure. So when I started my company in the mid 90s, the need was to go out and design good products that obviously could be manufactured. So where does design fit in? Every supplier I know complains about the piece of the design that isn't working properly. And so our job as designers to try to do a better job, not only to represent users, but to actually pull on technologies and mature, reliable components and successful integrations of final assemblies that allow suppliers, once a product hits the real world, to actually work through the details of the changes and refinements they need, where you're not embedding fundamentally problematic design elements into a design that create customer problems and returns and all the other things that supply chain management deals with. So we're the supply chain management's biggest headache because we get to go muck around in the sandbox, come up with cool things. And if we don't do our job professionally, reliably, we're just handing off the problem to the supply chain group that then has to go manage it.
Okay, so talk me through the process. I have an idea for a new widget. I come up with a rough design myself because I have pretensions of being a designer, and then I hand it off to you. Is that how it happens?
Yeah. So we deal with three types of clients. We deal with mature companies that have portfolios, that have product lines. They're innovating in some way. Sometimes it's incremental innovation. They do that internally. It's easy to navigate those. As you bring in new technology, you want to embed Wi-Fi into an existing product. You want to go to a better user interface. You want to put a display in, but you're really cost sensitive. So you got to figure out how you're going to do that successfully. You want to connect to an app on a smartphone. You want to introduce Bluetooth. There's many reasons why you as a company, a larger company, want to navigate through something that's new to you. And you would use a company like ours to help either with a component or an element of the design. Or in many cases, business startups, people who want to be more virtual, they really don't want the headaches of manufacturing. They would use us to help them get all their design ready, all the design files ready, and transfer that into a manufacturer, contract manufacturer, typically, and pick somewhere in the world that they would do that. And our company does the not only the design elements of taking your idea, but the engineering elements, the component selection elements, the bills of materials, the quality elements that help the client have a professional conversation with a third party partner, which ultimately they will need to manufacture the goods. And we're there as a go between for a period of time until our usefulness is done. And then we get out and we do it again. And we do about 70 products a year now with a team of 30.
Cool. So, Kevin, what would be typical, let's say, challenges that companies have when they approach you, or what might be kind of some misconceptions, or mistakes is probably a strong word, but misapprehensions when they approach you with a design or a request for design?
Sure. It's great to have an example so that we can talk to an example. And if you've got one that you may be interested in, we could talk about that, or we could just pick something. Recently we did an e-scooter. Everyone knows about e-scooters.
Yeah.
So why would you, as a company, choose to develop an e-scooter? There's lots out there already, but there's lots of cities. There's lots of opportunity in those spaces for competition. So we've done an e-scooter recently with the company as an example. So they came in as an experienced company. They've done, in many cases, it's distribution companies that are actually part of the marketing and business side already, where they want to do their own scooter versus purchase a scooter from some company because they got a host of supply related problems with that, purchase. They're a third party. So they say, look, we can do this better. So they would come to a company like ours and say, okay, we want to do our own. What's involved? What kind of development budgets? And you're talking many dollars to be able to pull it off. But
Sure.
ultimately, you own that. You choose your manufacturers. You do all the control on that manufacturer. Possibly you have two, and you have a dual supply stream. It just depends on your volumes. Our business, we're very good at helping people get started where it's ones and tens and 50s and 500s and 1000s. Where there's many manufacturers out there, once you hit, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, all of a sudden it's an easier conversation because there's actually a business for them as well. So you have to navigate through that early stage of getting something that's high quality, designed for 50,000, not designed for 1 or 10, by a professional team that understands when you get to 50,000, you got to be buttoned down. You've got to have all your component selections, all your suppliers identified, qualified element, qualified final assemblies, qualified tests, whatever you're going to do to make sure that product comes off the line. We're there as a professional partner for anywhere there's holes. There's many contract manufacturers come in and they've got good processes, so they don't need any guidance or support. But we act for our clients to make sure that we identify risks, because really our game is opportunity and risk. Design is the opportunity side, risk is the supply side. And we act as a professional team to help clients navigate that risk as they try to bring that opportunity to market.
Cool. On your website, you say that your business model respects the ownership rights of inventors and product developers. How do you strike a balance between providing guidance and letting your clients lead? Is that an issue that comes up from time to time?
Yeah, there's it's an easy answer, and I've worked in the larger corporations where software and software reuse is a real part of every day as a module gets reused for other purposes. In our world, in the physical design world, it's a lot less problematic. Everything we do, our clients own. That's just the bottom line. Anything that is licensed from somewhere else, a piece of software module or something that's required, a client has to make that choice. Our job is to make sure that's in front of them as they make that choice for that particular software module, for example, going into a product that they want the licensing fee and they want that structure versus design the code themselves. So we're in this constant game of customize or off the shelf. And in many cases, the middle zone is the tough one where it's a customize off the shelf, whether it be a module that's a physical design, a mechanical component, or an actual sensor or a chipset that's going to be specialized just for you, the client, just for this application. All of a sudden it's customized, it's sole sourced. There's something special about it. And you've now got to win the heart of that supplier with quantity, with enough reason for that supplier to supply you. So those are the ugly ones, but those are the risk discussions. If you're not having those risk discussions while you're doing the design, not getting in the way of the design group, but making sure as they make component selections, they're doing it with the supply strategy in mind. And that's really the difference between companies like ours and design companies. Many design companies will do a great job at the design. You'll spend hundreds of thousands refining the best, looking at the users, understanding their needs, developing something that meets those needs. But as a design group, you may not have a reach into the supply stream. So you're going to pick something you see locally as a component in the hardware design. This isn't the
Mhm.
digital world. This isn't just software. This is those components that once they're embedded into your design, they now can become a problem. You may have gone to a local source, and that's actually a supply company that has a 30% markup, and they're buying it from a third party who's buying it from the actual manufacturer. If you're not working with the manufacturer on your supply parts, one, you leave an opportunity for cost reduction, but two, there's now a chain of people that can lead to a supply issue. So knowing where your parts come from, knowing those suppliers, understanding their needs, understanding your volumes, do they meet their needs, picking carefully through your supply strategy while you're doing the design is critical. And you solve it by doing it during the concept stage versus waiting till prototype and test or waiting till the transfer to the manufacturer, where most of the problems today get identified by companies that don't pay attention to that.
How do you source the original manufacturers of these components to make sure that you're getting the best possible price and, let's say, the most secure procurement strategy for actually making sure that they arrive and there are no shortages?
Yeah. And one thing is it's not about best price. It's about your needs from a quantity point of view, your initial year or two. What are you going to do for that period and whether or not that component affects a whole bunch of other components. So really it's a strategy of quality with a price overlay.
Right.
And availability with a price overlay. Some things are just not available to you in small volume, and you're done, right? You have to come up with a better scheme. So it's a creative approach to cost, as you said, availability, and location in the world where you're building as well. Those are elements that lead to costs associated with moving goods around the world to build stuff. So many companies now are looking at how we build in Asia, subcomponents,
Hmm.
and how we bring it to North America for final assembly, or we bring it to Mexico, or we bring it to Vietnam. We're dealing with companies that deal with all those situations. And our supply team, which is embedded in the company, we're not a design company only. We're a design company, an engineering company, and a supply company. And so with those two together, and you have a team like that that sits at a table as you weigh through the options and you weigh through the high user value and really understanding that piece of it, but also weigh through the engineering, the feasibility, and the supply and supply constraints.
Okay, okay. And you talk as well on your site about a lean product design process, which involves, I'm guessing, rapid iterations and prototyping. Can you talk a little bit about what that entails? Maybe give us an example or two. And tell me as well, how do you know when the prototyping process is finished and you're ready to go to full product manufacture?
Yeah, it's an interesting area. It's highly complex. It's the reason why expert teams are expert teams is because situationally you're going to make different decisions, but there's some themes, there's some guidelines that'll
Mm.
really help people. So let's start back with your first question, which is actually, Tom, do you want to ask that one again? It's
Sure, yeah, no problem. So,
there's two bites there, and I want to make sure I get both bites.
yeah,
There's
yeah, yeah.
different
So,
answers.
yeah, no problem. So I was talking about the lean product design process.
Yeah,
So, and I'm guessing it involves rapid iterations and prototyping. So I guess the first thing is to talk a bit about what that entails. And then the second part is the rapid iteration and prototyping. How do you know when the prototyping process has concluded and you're ready to go to full manufacturing?
sure. Okay. So Tom, if let's talk about the lean process first. So you can prototype everything. So you come in to me with a idea for let's say it's a wall-mounted camera system for people that have warehousing. You
Hmm.
need a camera system for warehousing, one to monitor events, to monitor people flows, because you're going to do some operational changes. You're going to, maybe introduce automated forklifts or something that suggests. So let's say you have this need to say, if I just knew what was going on in my factory or in my distribution facility or whatever, I could do it better. I can make my business opportunity leaner, more competitive, whatever. So for me as a hardware person, I need to put a box on a wall with a camera in it, some electronics, and a connection to the network so that I can actually process that data and provide useful information. There'll be an app company somewhere that's going to do all that, but we're the hardware people. We're going to make sure that device gets looked at from a point of view of installability, maintenance. There's a variety of areas. So getting on to lean now. What would I prototype? Well, let's say I'm a design company that's never done this before. I may prototype 20 things. I may get some electronic components in and check a few things out. The more experienced you are as a design development company, the less you need to prototype. So the very first thing you do is you actually define where your high risks are. And some of the high risks are because you as a design company have never done that before. And to be honest with your clients about that versus just saying we can do it. You're going to spend a bit of time there, but you don't hire a company because they know everything about everything. You hire a company because they can guide you through the decisions and they can actually do most of the work. And you may need experts in certain areas to come in and help, but to be honest with clients about that. Yeah. So back to opportunity and risks. So the opportunity space is, who are our users? Who's going to do the installation? Do you need a mighty lift or something to put it up on the wall because it's got to be 12 foot high? What's the installation cost? So you'll go through usability, you'll go through installation. What we do is what's called a bump process, which is business requirements, user requirements, market requirements, and product requirements. And so it's a requirements discussion before you get into solution, because there isn't a person that I've ever dealt with that doesn't want to start with the solution. When you get into the emotional, hey, it's just got to do this, and we've been thinking about this, and we've got the idea, the concept's this, we want to do this way. Those are great. That's a starting point. Call it your concept number one. Now you got to go back to requirements, and it's an iterative process. So a bit of requirements discussions, back to the solutions. Maybe you come up with a concept 2 or concept 3 and you say, hey, if it was a little different, we could address these features and these issues. But in the background to the user experience and the customer experience and the functions of the product in terms of what apps it may connect to and what are the electronics and software going to need to do. You want to be building those requirements and building out the solutions around that. You also want to be talking supply. And so the supply team, they have to be at the table, not to get in the way, but to say, okay, high level, major components, what are we talking about? Is there anything here that's customized off the shelf? Is there anything here that is licensed or required to be licensed? We want to have that business discussion within the context of supply. And that's really the business requirements. Typically, we focus on supply requirements and cost at the early stages. And that's cost of assembly. So components, are we at the $20 level or the $10 level for cost of goods, export factory, and are we building it in Asia or are we building it in North America? Let's build in some factors there because goods will have to travel. And at a very high level, we're not trying to do an exhaustive study. We're trying to look for high risk. And through those conversations, when they're structured, you get to high risk elements. You put on the high risk list and you say, okay, those elements we should probably test. Sometimes it's a physical test. Sometimes we get components in, we get some samples and we look at them. And then we look at the software libraries and the available issues and what we're going to be connecting to and are they compatible? So you have to go through that high risk. So we test things. And when I say test, that's what people that maybe are not in this industry say prototype. We're going to prototype something, right? So the question is prototyping of an electronic circuit or prototyping of a product or prototyping of a user interface or prototyping of, how it interacts with the app are all different types of prototypes done because you see risk.
Okay.
So you prototype risk. So the short answer to your question, you prototype risks that you identify. And in many cases, as you travel farther along, you want to prototype the entire product, but you don't want to be doing that as a one pass. We do a bunch of design, then you prototype the entire product, then you iterate, prototype the entire product again, then that is very costly. And many companies that walk in that are naive to this, they just want that. I want a demo model. I want to show it to investors. I need it to function. And they don't understand that in hardware, that's not a sketch and order some prototype parts. And if you want a non-working and you want to show them, look, well, we can do that on screen with renderings and realistic backgrounds. And we can also produce, objects that are the right size and they look, but that's not function. And more, it's not about what an object looks like. It's really how it functions, how it integrates with a smartphone, how it integrates, because you're looking for that higher fidelity of assessment of, do we have a wow product? And that's what investors want to see is the wow. And so there's always this contradiction between, I just need a demo model to show my investors so I can get the money so I can proceed forward. Hardware, it's really hard to do that, but there's tricks you can do. There's identification of what the decision process is for those investors and providing stimulus materials that help qualify that opportunity for them and the risks. And that doesn't have to be, here's the product. That can be, here's the business case. Here's products like this. Here's a demonstration of the new functionality. And sure, it's a bunch of wires in a box and a display, and it's around something. And by the way, here's what the final product is going to look like. But here we're looking at a box of functionality, and we separate the conversations into where the real investor decision value is. And that might be supply chain. There may be risks associated with the business side of it. And it's not really about the product. It's about whether or not you as a company, your size, can get a manufacturer of some level of quality to produce these because they're already producing these, or whether you're starting from scratch and you've got a whole supply chain risk that an astute investor would say, wow, I'm not only developing a product, I'm actually starting a supply chain, and that's a bigger risk. And some people will take it on, some won't, but we really like to have those conversations with our clients about where their risk lies. And it's not just with product, it's business, it's user, it's market, and it's product requirements and risks. And then test the ones. So back to your comment on prototyping, test the things as we go along at the right times with just enough qualification. So you're not doing a $100,000 test or $25,000 user study, or, you're doing very targeted lean tests associated with the specific risk. And our job as risk managers and risk discussion and risk facilitators is to have the opportunity and don't lose sight of the opportunity, but don't get bogged down in the risk. And anybody that's been through the last 30 years, when you bring in the quality manager into a design discussion, they don't go well unless that quality manager is very astute with what is being discussed, knowing that we have to explore opportunity and we have to live with risk. And then we'll qualify it after we've, found the magic in the product. And that's always the dichotomy between supply chain and design, is that a responsible design group can have competent, responsible conversations with the supply chain if they're informed, if they're involved in some of the elements, not all of it, of the early design. And then we document in such a way so that when we transfer designs through to manufacturing, the supply chain sees where their risk lies and where they should focus, which is there's always risk. There isn't a product I've ever done that doesn't have some form of issues when it finally hits market that have to be navigated by marketing, by customer service, by returns. In many cases, it's not because the design team did anything wrong. Is it because they really didn't know exactly what the user wanted until they got it in their hands? And then the user has things that they'd like or things that don't work for them. And you can't always design out and prototype out everything. You can do most of it, but you can't do everything.
Cool, Kevin.
A long-winded answer. So I'll finish up with this. When do you stop prototyping? You stop prototyping because you always take risks in design and in supply. You stop prototyping or doing those small tests. And it can be, if we take a design, the scooter, we do the initial concept, it's on paper. We identify major components, detailed engineering. We go through and we work through all the details on all the parts, the full bill of materials, specification of where the prototype parts will come from. And in many cases, the production parts will come, for some of the production parts, they'll come from somewhere else because you have to prototype certain parts. You can't get the production part because it might be a casting or something you're not going to invest in until you've done all your prototyping. So when do you stop prototyping? As soon as you can transfer to a manufacturer that's committed to work with the client. Your prototypes now are early production units. You've qualified it to the point you can, but prototypes are expensive. So you're trying to move on to the qualification of the production parts with your production manufacturers as soon as you can. And you'll do the fine tuning with them, not, at a prototype level, which is you're never 100%, right? Those prototype parts are never quite what the final product will be. And you're going to have to debug all that stuff anyway. So we try to move you to the manufacturer's supply stream and their suppliers. There's many, I'll use this example. If I had a scooter, if we include all the electronics component, it might be 500 parts. So let's just assume we're doing a simple product that's got 100 parts. 90 of those parts are off the shelf, easy to find, multi-source. You're not going to have problems with them. You
Sure.
may find a bad batch, but that's up to the incoming quality group at the manufacturer. But that's not a design problem. Right? So design within the specifications and tolerances, those 90 of the 100 parts are straightforward. We've picked them to do their purpose, and we've qualified them in prototyping, all good. There's 10 parts, some of which are customized off the shelf, sole sourced, something unique, which are likely to give you some level of headache. So you want to prototype them. Let's say it's I put microprocessors in this list because you're ultimately going to put custom software in that you wrote or that came from libraries that need some customization, right? So it's custom, it's off the shelf. And that once it's programmed, it might come right from the manufacturer programmed, or it might be programmed on the assembly line, whatever it is that's customized. And it can lead to problems because once you've put it on the board, stuck it in the field, if it's a problem, right, all those units are coming back.
Mm.
And then there's the fully custom parts. There's the injection molded parts and things. Those are a lot easier. Those are straightforward because the manufacturer has full control on them. They may still give quality problems. There's no issue there, but you have supply control. So we always like to identify that last group of 10 parts and say, okay, we're going to focus here. So you stop prototyping when you've done a reasonable job of risk and know that you can't go any farther. If you can put in, not only qualify it functioning well in a lab, but also put it in some customer hands, then you may catch a couple other things you might want to refine while you're getting the manufacturing set up and doing your qualification of the tools. For example, on injection parts, we get involved in all the qualifications to make sure that parts are coming off. And tools nowadays are much better than they used to be in terms of accurate, specific tolerance, where before we'd get a plastic part off on the inside would not be to spec and parts would interfere. And then we'd go back and make some design changes because they didn't want to make tool changes and, this back and forth. So there's a manufacturing setup stage, which takes time. You're prototyping still, if you want to call that prototyping, but really you're refining the final product for the first batch build, your bill of materials associated with your first batch build, and, get units in, you do that batch build. We get some parts back. We qualify some things if there's some issues, and then they can either sell it, then maybe they put them in field trials. Maybe they're not going to be selling them. They're really just going to be checking out, 5 units versus 100, or depending on how many get built. But whatever it is, the manufacturer now owns the design. That's right. The manufacturer owns the execution of the design. The customer owns all the design files because we made sure that all the release controls, all the documentation is maintained by us for the customer until such time as the customer builds their own operations team. In many cases that happens, and sometimes it's a mix where we hand off over a year or we hand off over a month, depends on what your clients need. But, we're a high cost as something gets mature. We're a low cost as you have problems because many manufacturers aren't set up to figure out what a problem is, but they need to be told, where to focus because they'll come up with great ideas, but you end up going around in circles, or they'll take over the design and they'll make design changes on their own. And now you're tied to that manufacturer because you haven't got design control anymore. That's a real important thing for clients to understand is you have to maintain design control. Or I can give you a litany of examples of customers that either show up because they've lost design control with someone else and we have to redo their entire product, or not the entire product, but a big chunk of it has to be redocumented so they can move on to a different supplier because they've lost the relationship with that partner they had.
Right. Cool. There's a big move at the moment, Kevin, towards the right to repair and also a shift towards kind of circular economy. So designing parts that can be reused at end of useful life of product. Is that something that you're starting to see impact on the design process as well?
So since the 80s, that conversation has gone on in every design or design related thing. So yeah, it comes down to this, Tom. If we take those 100 parts, we can do design for assembly. So to help the manufacturer to make sure it's easy to build. We can do design for disassembly. We can do modularity. There's many things that take more development time and dollars to sort through. You build off of whatever's out there. And I'm not talking about taking an existing alarm clock and making a new alarm clock. I look at those as incremental design, right? Because most of the thinking's been done. So I look at fundamental design and fundamental things where you can really impact, what material gets picked, how does it with landfill, should it get there? disassembly at the electronics level or at the physical hardware level. But here's the nut. When you look at reliability and those 100 components selected, you're looking for, as much as possible, mature components that have a life history. And so, for example, let's take the custom parts, the injection molded parts, the plastics. There are certain elements that are already embedded in, and we can, we're picking components, we're identifying them as recyclable on the components. So should they be disassembled, they are identified as ABS or polystyrene or polycarbonate or whatever is being used. And they're acceptable in the waste streams of certain countries or certain cities. So I love the migration towards one, recyclability of the components. But now if you say to me, I want a plastic that degrades, so when it does hit landfills, it degrades in, let's say, 5 years. You could say 3 months, but which customer or client or product development or supply team would introduce a component that's inferior in its specs in terms of survivability? Because its survivability is not a dial up. Mean time to failure for electronics is a well-established field. There's mostly mature components. When you get down to your injection molded parts and your metal parts and your rubber parts and all the things that you've customly built for yourself at a supplier in low volume, there's no stats that are going to tell you how long that's going to last, right? It'll come down to the cycle time on a machine because it was the middle of summer and humidity, and those parts are just going out, and they're not going to get anywhere near the yields or the tolerances of what they say the average part would be. So when you design for reusability or recyclability, you have to be really careful in material selection, because there's a wide variety of new materials out there. But are you going to take that risk as a client where one failure, those 100 components, when they come together, any one of those parts fails, you have someone returning your product, right? That's the difference between hardware and software is you've got inventory and landfill for every mistake that gets made. And you don't have the same weight on you as a software company developing software. Your changes can still be problematic, but they're not anywhere near costly as the hardware world.
Sure. We're coming towards the end of the podcast now, Kevin. Is there any question that I haven't asked that you wish I had, or any aspect of this we haven't touched on that you think it's important for people to think about?
Yeah. And I'd love to hit two really quickly. One is the shift from made in China, where I've been working in China since the early 90s. So we have actively probably between 7 and 15 projects on the go that are sourced from China through reputable manufacturers in some form. We've got North America as well, but because of electronics goods and the low to moderate volume, I'll say sub 10,000 units a year, the ecosystem that's been built in China, Shanghai area, Shenzhen area, Hong Kong, those ecosystems are, you have to see them to believe them. I've been to Germany. I've worked in Germany in the Tri-City with Dusseldorf and Cologne and Essen. They are another area of the world for me as I'm a mechanical engineer, not an electrical engineer. So I love to build things. That's why I got into this when I was young, and I'd like to make objects work. So those suppliers of the world are really difficult to reproduce globally. There's many pockets of the US that have many components for certain types of products, but the general use products that, inventors and startups and businesses in general, there are elements that need to come from somewhere else in the world. So there is this shift to not built in China with the tariffs and things, which is good and interesting. It does what I really want to do, is to bring manufacturing and manufactured goods back to North America, because the impact of physical manufacturing and design on new design, on creative thinking is going away. The understanding of materials, the understanding of processes, how to process, metals and plastics and things our kids aren't learning. And that's a real downside. We're one of the few that can represent all the manufacturing processes, because we work with the people that are doing state of the art in the world today. It just happens to not All of them are in North America. In fact, few of them are. When you talk displays, batteries, Wi-Fi modules, all the things that go into the latest connected devices, it's just difficult to beat that. So supply chain is a transition to more onshoring. Very keen on, very interested in. We look with our clients and our manufacturing partners that are interested in actually bringing facilities outside of China, working in Vietnam and Mexico, and that collaboration is going to take a decade or more. But I like the trend. I like where it's going.
Cool. You said there was a second thing. You said two things.
Yeah, AI, the topical. Where is AI? Right? It's definitely early days. The AI for us as a design development company is fantastic as an input tool. It's kind of Google, it's search engine number 2. It's a research assistant. It's a collaborator. It's, page 1 is all you get in Google. This actually aggregates information. So it might be on page 20 or page 30. It's bringing information up to a page 1, which is very specific to the question you ask. And so as people that will fine tune themselves on the chat GPTs and the other tools out there, it's the question you ask. And reframing of the question 4 different ways to figure out how deep the digital pool of information is. So I can ask it one way and say, I'm trying to lift a weight 30 feet up in the air. It's steel. How much energy do I need to do that? And what if it's not steel? What if it's something else? What's the dimensions of the steel? So you can do that now. As an engineer, I'd get out my book and I'd remember my formula and I'd do my calculation and I would get an answer. ChatGPT now will give me the answer. They'll also give me the formula and they'll say, and so as an expert, I can say, well, that formula doesn't apply. So I'm going to ask the question slightly differently. And I ask it 4 different ways and it gives me back different information. It's not giving back the same information. So I can triangulate what it knows, right? Very quickly, where a non-expert is going to have trouble. So it's good as an input tool. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
As an output tool now, it's got all kinds of things. So that's on the search side. On the visualization side, the mid-journeys and things are allowing us to visualize things as input tools for collaboration as we get into groups and say, here's competitors, here's different things going on. We're trying to focus on this feature set visually. Let's get some stimulus tools. And what we rely on as designers currently to draw some stuff up, and that helps the conversations. So now we can have these stimulus tools build us things that may or may not apply, but we as experts can look and go, more of that, less of that. Let's try this. And so it's a great collaboration tool. And the other piece of AI in the design side, which will lead to the supply side, is there's smarter devices currently. Sensors and things that are putting software modules in that are actually doing some learning, doing data manipulation and data analysis right in the devices with smaller, lower powered sensors. So it's not always having to go up to the cloud. So now we can be offline as we talked earlier about, recordings and things and trying to manage this sort of intermittent online connection. Users don't want that. They want, so aggregating information at the end device and presenting that information in some form and collaborating with the cloud in the background, but not making that a real-time issue for users. So we're seeing more in the AI embedded into electronics now, which is really interesting.
Cool. Great. Kevin, that's been really interesting. If people would like to know more about yourself or any of the things we discussed on the podcast today, where would you have me direct them?
Thanks, Tom. Best way to reach us, design1st.com. Just Design1st, type us in, we'll be first page, and you can learn all about us and what product development is, which is a series of structured steps. Take them with an experienced team. I recommend that to everyone. It's really important that this activity of hardware product development be nurtured back in North America. We're actually designing products and building products and maintaining the supply streams of those products so that we're learning and developing our skills for the next generation that's coming, which needs all that knowledge. Like we lost displays to China. We lost this intricate knowledge of exactly how you build displays, which turned into massive industries in TVs and monitors and the next generation of flex and small, big, whatever. And I've walked through the biggest display factories in the world. I've walked through the biggest lithium battery manufacturers in the world. I've had tours in the back. I've looked at it and I go, wow, it's none of it's rocket science, but this over time, over building millions and millions of things, you've refined all the processes, you've refined your input materials. You're working with really high quality stuff because you can and because you're doing volume. We have to get that back. We have to actually participate in the exercise of taking the things that we're good at. Some stuff probably not going to come back, but we could get competitive with it. Other stuff we're already doing now, we're innovating now. Let's stick with those and let's build those out and not just transfer all that knowledge around the world.
Great, great, fantastic. Super. Kevin, that's been really, really interesting. Thanks a million for coming on the podcast today.
A pleasure talking with you, Tom. Thank you.